So it's probably about time we talk about the Canadian Grand Prix. Welcome back to Race Review, everyone. If you're here for the first time, welcome, for sure, welcome. It's been a bit all over the place recently on this channel. Exams end next Friday, so everything should be back to normal. We'll have the big rebranding of the channel coming out sometime around then. But today, we're going to unfortunately have to talk about the Canadian Grand Prix. In my opinion, the worst race of the season. Coming out the back with a very controversial statement. It was just such a snooze fest, and whether that's because it was such a late race, I watched the Channel 4 highlights rather than Sky, which meant that I had to watch the race at 12 o'clock at night till 1 o'clock in the morning. So, not ideal, for sure, not ideal. But the race was just dreadful. I couldn't believe I'd stayed up all that time to watch a race like that. I was so disappointed with the Canadian Grand Prix. And let's quickly talk about qualifying, because qualifying, I think, was the best qualifying again of the season. I think it did top Monaco. Really enjoyed the qualifying session. Sebastian Vettel was on top, followed by Valtteri Bottas, again outperforming Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen hit a bit of form again this weekend. He's bounced back really strongly. Lewis Hamilton was P4, Kimi Räikkönen P5, and Daniel Ricciardo rounded out the top 6. But all of them were ridiculously close this weekend, and realistically, any of them could have been on the front row. So that was fantastic to see, and I think a lot of people were really excited at the prospect of a really good race. I know I was, for sure. I was really looking forward to it. Thought we had a real fight on our hands. Real strategic battle as well, with the Red Bull starting on the hypersofts, the Ferraris and Mercedes starting on the ultra softs. But what a boring race it was. You know what? I sometimes go through the race lap by lap. I sometimes do it team by team. But looking at my notes from this race, lap 1, we had the big crash between Stroll and Hartley that I'll talk about a little bit later. Lap 4, the race got back underway after the safety car. Lap 17 was when the pit stop started to happen. Alonso went out. Grosjean was the only real driver, in my opinion, that could have mixed up the field late on. And then the checkered flag incident happened. So, what a dull race that was. A real lack of any substance, to be perfectly honest with you. So let's just go through then, driver by driver, and see how they got in that position. So starting off then with race winner, Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari, started in first, led practically every single lap, won the race. Standard day in the office for Sebastian Vettel. Very happy, I'm sure he will be, with his performance. And scoring 15 more points than Lewis Hamilton means he is now at the top of the drivers' standings. And I wouldn't be surprised if he stays there for the rest of the season. I really wouldn't. And when we go on to talk about Lewis Hamilton, a few question marks I'm starting to have over Lewis Hamilton, because to be honest, I think the biggest challenger to Sebastian Vettel this season is going to be the man who finished in P2, Valtteri Bottas. And if he'd have had luck go his way this season, he could be right up there with Sebastian, and Lewis would be down the order for sort of with Ricciardo's sort of points. So Valtteri Bottas, he started second, finished second. The only real drama for him was on the opening lap, got out the shoulders, got out the elbows to try and fend off Max Verstappen. Very good driving there from Valtteri. Very impressed, actually, from the opening laps there. He then made a little mistake about halfway through, getting through some traffic, passing one of the Renaults. Then he said in some pre- or post-interviews that he just, after that, couldn't quite compose himself and ended up about 8 seconds behind Sebastian Vettel. But at one stage, it did look like he was catching him, but all the drivers this weekend said how hard it was to overtake on this track, and it was very evident from everyone up and down the grid, to be honest with you. P3, Max Verstappen, quiet race for him, except lap 1 fighting with Bottas in those first few corners. Relatively unchallenged behind. Late on into the race, he was catching Bottas, but Bottas has said in interviews that that was manageable. He was saving fuel for the end of the race. And they were just trying to get across the line, really. So, again, a disappointment, really, there. Ended up 8 seconds behind Sebastian Vettel was Max Verstappen, so very close between him and Bottas. P4, the first person that didn't finish where they qualified, Daniel Ricciardo. Surprisingly, quiet race for him as well. The only reason he got in front of Raikkonen and Hamilton, he got Raikkonen off the line, and then Hamilton, he managed to pass with a lovely little overcut strategy that worked very well for him. Very interesting, actually, that Ricciardo was able to do an overcut on the option tyre, the Hypersoft tyre. That was very interesting. Thought that was something quite unique, actually, that we don't usually see that. But Hamilton's been struggling on his tyres at most races this season. Whether that's a Mercedes issue or a Hamilton issue, unsure, but Valtteri doesn't seem to be having these issues with these tyres. So I don't think Lewis is quite, despite having the 2 wins, I don't think he's quite got the grips with his car just yet. P6, Kimi Raikkonen, the classic Kimi Raikkonen Ferrari performance, really. Nothing stellar, just sort of there, going around, doing the laps and trying to get the job done for the constructors, really. But a difficult weekend for Kimi. P7, best of the rest, Nico Hülkenberg. P8, again, best of the rest, Carlos Sainz. So Renault doing very well this weekend for themselves, getting up to 4th now in the constructors with a comfortable buffer to McLaren. Great job from them, securing 14 points. Best of the rest is all they can hope for, really, this season. And so if they can secure that 4th place, I think that'll be a job well done. And if they can secure 7th and 8th in the driver's standings, I think they'll be very happy with that as well. I don't think there's anything they can do, really, to get much better than that. You already see there's a 20-point gap between 7th place and 6th place. 7th place is Fernando Alonso at the moment, actually. And 6th is Max Verstappen. But I imagine Max is now, after this weekend, no incidents. A first incident-free weekend for him. Hopefully he hits a bit of form now. That'd be great to see. Hopefully he can win a race in the next few races. That'd be even better to see. And I don't imagine Fernando will be going back as high as 5th place, I think, or 4th place, I think he was, in the drivers after the second race. So I don't think anyone that's not in a Ferrari, Mercedes or Red Bull will be hitting those heights the rest of the season. But I definitely think it's most likely that Hülkenberg will get 7th. And I think Sainz will get 8th. It's very close between the two of them, but so far Hülkenberg has been the better driver, in my opinion. They currently, like I say, sit in 8th and 9th in the driver's standings with 32 points and 24 points, respectively. Behind them was Esteban Ocon. Couldn't really do much in the Force India. Didn't seem to have the race pace like the Renault did. Was ahead of them in the early stages. Ocon made a fantastic move on the opening lap around the outside of Hülkenberg. Behind them, Hartley tried to do the same thing, but it didn't have Hülkenberg. He was trying to overtake it. It was Lance Stroll, and Lance Stroll still a bit wobbly on the steering wheel. Kick of oversteer, but we'll move on to them, like I say, a little bit later. Final point scored with Charles Leclerc. Another great race from him. This is the first time in a long time, I think since 2014 Nico Hülkenberg, that a driver has had 3 points finishes. Great stuff from Charles Leclerc. Already putting together a good amount of points for the drivers' standings. He's only 1 point behind Esteban Ocon. Can you believe? That is pretty impressive. He's ahead of Stoffel Van Dorn, ahead of Lance Stroll, ahead of Romain Grosjean, ahead of Brendan Hartley. I think 14th is very impressive indeed. I don't think he'll get higher than that, to be honest with you. He might in the next few races if he's able to get a point here and there. But over the remainder of the season, I imagine Van Dorn will be able to get ahead. I imagine Grosjean will be able to get ahead. And Hartley, well, not the weekend he needed to be keeping his seat. So I would imagine he'll be replaced. And I imagine whoever replaces Hartley will also get ahead of Charles Leclerc in the standings. But so far, 10 points. That's a solid effort, to be honest, from Charles. And considering how dire that car was last year, I know Pascal Wehrlein pulled off some absolute clutch drives. And I think, to be honest, I think it's unfair that Pascal Wehrlein's never talked about anymore. I know he's been mentioned for this Toro Rosso drive, but he was in a worse car than Charles Leclerc and still managed to get in the points. So I think it would have been even better if we saw Wehrlein and Leclerc in the Sauber. We could have really seen how quick Leclerc was, but obviously we don't have that, we can't have that, and so we've got to base it off of Ericsson's performance. So Ericsson has been lacking a bit, to be honest with you, since he picked up his first point early on in the season. So yeah, not too great from Ericsson. Moving on to Pierre Gasly. Started right near the back of the field. I think it was P19, I believe it was. But still, ended up P11, just one position out of the points. A solid job from him. And behind him, Romain Grosjean started dead last in P20 and ended 12th. Both of those two, Gasly and Grosjean, went for a longer first stint. I think Grosjean did around 50 laps on one set of tyres. Then, strangely enough, then went on to the super softs. Whether they had any hyper softs left, I don't know. Whether they didn't think they could make the distance, I don't know. But I think that could have really changed the race if they'd have gambled again with a better tyre. But in those closing laps, he did seem to have the pace to be able to get past Gasly and Leclerc. But as soon as he caught up to Gasly, the dirty air in the cars, again this season, it's been such a talking point, a disappointment. But again, he couldn't get past him and unfortunately could only manage P12. Grosjean, for me, was my driver of the day actually. Very impressed with Romain Grosjean to bounce back from a difficult qualifying to end up in front of Kevin Magnussen. I know perhaps he had a bit of better strategy, but Magnussen starting P11, yeah, I was just impressed with Grosjean this weekend. He needed to bounce back, and I think, yes, it's still not points, and points is what he needs, really, and desperately, but I think this is good, and I think it'll be nice as well, hoping that next time out at his home race at Paul Ricard in France, he could get his first point of the season. Not ideal that it's taken this long, but hoping my man Romain Grosjean can finally get some points, but it's not been an ideal season for him yet, but this will definitely, I think, quieten some of the critics. Not all of them, but some of them. It's quieted me down, to be honest with you. I was very vocal about Grosjean's poor performances this season, and going into the season, I thought he was going to be best of the rest, to be honest. So I've been very disappointed with Romain, but I think this weekend was his best race of the season, in my opinion, and I think more to come for this season, more to come. I don't think he'll get replaced at all. Kevin Magnussen, P13, very quiet. P14, Sergio Perez was up there in the points, made contact with Carlos Sainz on the safety car restart, and after that, a pretty nothing race again from Sergio Perez. So he'll be disappointed with that. Ocon scoring again. Ocon, this happened last year. Perez had the strong start, and then Ocon slowly sort of overtook him, and I think already we're seeing Ocon glimpses that he could do that. The last 2 weekends of Ocon have been very good. Before that, pretty nondescript. So this is good from Ocon to start to push Perez a bit more. Rounding out to probably the biggest disappointment of the whole weekend, to be honest with you, Marcus Ericsson, very quiet, touched the wall in qualifying, so he didn't go much further than that. P16, Stoffel Van Dorn, actually, got to mention there, Ericsson and Van Dorn, both of them got caught up in the Hartley Stroll incident on the first lap, so credit where credit's due, and I want to be fair there. Both of them were pretty much doomed from lap 1. Stoffel Van Dorn attempting a two-stop strategy. They were so far away from everything because of that to come in so early. They tried to do something different, didn't work, so ended up behind Marcus Ericsson. But behind them was Sergei Sorokin, an awful race for him. Nothing really he could do, really, to be honest with you. The biggest incident for him was probably when he had Vettel and Bottas, I think it was, or Hamilton and Ricciardo, actually. And Hamilton was trying to catch him. Sorokin got in the way a little bit, but nothing too major. I'm just trying to think of anything with Sorokin, but we didn't see him at all. 3 non-finishers then this weekend. Fernando Alonso, Brendan Hartley and Lance Stroll. Fernando Alonso was in the points. The lower end of the points, that is, fighting with Charles Leclerc. Great battle again between those two. Leclerc holding his own against the two-time world champion. Fernando eventually did get ahead. I believe it was in the pit stops. But again, 2 races in a row, his McLaren Renault has given up on him. And I think after this weekend in Le Mans, if he wins Le Mans, I think there'll be a big announcement that Fernando Alonso will retire from Formula 1 at the end of this season. I think, to be honest, I think the season started off strong for Alonso. It really did, and I think, to be honest with you, if they'd have kept up that form that they had in those early races, I think he'd have stayed another year, but recently it's been poor. This is sort of starting to get to that summer break when deals are starting to be struck between teams and drivers. If teams sniffing around Lando Norris, I think Fernando Alonso will be on his way to IndyCar next season. Obviously, rumours as well that McLaren will be joining up with Andretti again next year for not only the Indy 500 but the whole Indy season, and Michael Andretti was here this weekend at the Canadian Grand Prix. So a lot of question marks around that at the moment, but I think this big disappointment for Fernando Alonso, and he's gone through a lot in the past. Is it 4 years now? 4 years he's been at McLaren, 4 seasons. Yeah, it's just disappointing for him. So I don't imagine he'll be here next year after this weekend. Probably a bit of a cynical mindset I've got after this race, because it wasn't great. But probably the biggest talking point, finally we move on to it, the biggest talking point, the most interesting point of the race was the big smash, the biggest smash of the season, I think, so far, between Brendan Hartley and Lance Stroll. All the memes have been floating around on the internet, but it was a great crash. It was a great crash. Crofty over on the Sky coverage, pretty over-the-top reaction about the crash, although it was a bit of a smash-up. And on Channel 4, it was a relatively underwhelming sort of reaction to the crash. So, don't really know which one I prefer there, but I did love the crash, to be honest with you. It's great to see a crash. The only thing that disappointed me was the fact that it was Lance Stroll, his home race, and I've actually been quite impressed with Lance Stroll this season. Monaco, definitely not. Definitely not. His attitude was horrible. But the rest of the season, he's putting some really good performances in that Williams, just missing out on points and getting points. I believe it was in Baku. So, I mean, yes, it was a carnage race, but still getting points in that Williams already, pretty impressive from Lance Stroll. And he has said and pointed out that he got points earlier this season than he did last season. So he's definitely improved. But this is not what he needed. He needed a good race again. He needs to keep proving that he is their number one. And with silly mistakes, it's hard to say if it was a mistake, because we've not seen loads and loads of onboard footage, and that might just be because I've not looked for it because it was a boring race. But I haven't seen loads. I have seen the onboard from Stroll and from Hartley. 100% it was Stroll's fault or a racing incident. I think I'd put it more towards a racing incident, because he did have a kick of oversteer mid-corner, and it's such a difficult corner, and when you go around the outside of someone there, you do take the risk, and there's no way it was Brendan Hartley's fault, but it's very close for me between a racing incident and Stroll's fault. Hartley, it's not what he needed at all, and I know it wasn't his fault, but it doesn't matter. He didn't finish the race, and the Toro Rosso higher-ups will see that as another non-points finish. And Gasly, starting from pretty much last and getting right up there, just out of points, they'll see that, and unfortunately, on occasions in F1, stats do lie, you know, and they don't fill in the blanks. So for Hartley, I think this could be his last race in Formula 1, and I think next time we show up in France, and that a triple week, 3 weeks in a row, we have a Formula 1 Grand Prix, I imagine we'll see a new driver at Toro Rosso. Busy week this week. I think I'll have a Formula E show coming out in the next few days. Also, as well, I just want to mention that I'm going to be doing a video about the future of some other Formula 1 drivers that I think after this weekend in particular is under the microscope and under question. So hopefully you guys can look forward to that. My channel's been acting really weirdly since they put in this new sort of YouTube update with the subscription boxes. It's been really disappointing a little bit. I don't want to sound like a spoiled child, but I can already see the numbers have completely switched on the channel, so I don't really know why that is. Everything I've been doing has been exactly the same, and whether that is the reason, I don't know, but everything, if Formula 1 Weekly had consistent numbers, about 1,200 of you guys watching, and then all of a sudden it's dropped down to 100, so if you could click the notification bell if you do enjoy the content, that would be much appreciated, because I just want to work out really what's going on, to be honest. I might be because I'm just being a bit inconsistent at the moment, which is fair dues. I can't really argue with that. My priorities at the moment are my exams, to be honest with you. But the summer's coming up. As soon as I finish my exams, you've got those 3 weekends in a row of Formula 1. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you guys for sticking through this race. Oh, I nearly forgot, driver of the day and my score for the race. Score for the race, I'm going to give the lowest of the season so far, which is going to be a... I'll give it a 5. I'll give it a 5. I'll give it a 5 because I really enjoyed the qualifying. It's lucky, the Canadian Grand Prix. I've given it a 5, but I think if this was last year, it wouldn't have made the bottom 5 races, so I've got to bear it in mind. a little bit of my scoring last year. And my driver of the day, I'm going to give it... Well, it's difficult because Vettel was so commanding at the front, didn't put a foot wrong. Grosjean, I think between Vettel, Leclerc and Grosjean, but I'm going to give it to Vettel, actually. I always say this, I don't give it to the number one guy enough, and Vettel this weekend was dominant, superior. So yeah, Vettel is my driver of the day. Thank you guys for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next one.